Baby on board, how I've adored that sign on my car's window pane, a bouncing my step, loaded with pep, 'cause I'm driving in the carpool lane. Call me a square friend, I don't care. That little yellow sign can't be ignored. I'm telling you. One time somebody asked me what's my most controversial opinion, and I thought about it and I thought, yeah, I guess maybe my belief that we should get rid of private kitchens. So the thing is, I've mentioned this several times before as a belief that I encountered in a first wave feminist text, and I've always used it as an example of how first wave feminism was more radical than people give it credit for. And obviously, you know, like an actual more substantial survey of first wave. I mean, I love old books. I love old books. It's really easy to read like first wave feminist books because it's so delightfully antiquated. But the thing is, I've often attributed the quote to Olive, or the belief to Olive Schreiner, and turns out, like, I just did a quick kind of search through my notes of different books I've read, my research document, if you like, and it's not Olive Schreiner. It's a gentleman called Walter Lionel George. So I could have looked that up easily, but the whole time when people have been asking me, rather than looking it up, I've been saying, I think it's Olive Schreiner. The issue is, this was, I read a whole load of first wave feminist books, and I literally was reading like more than one book a day. And part of the issue I do blame is the fact that, like I say, it's just so bloody delightful to read because it's just so nice the way they talk about stuff. And anyway, on that note, this is the specific quote in question. It says that a street of 100 houses should indulge in 100 kitchens, 100 sculleries, and 100 pantries is ludicrous. So yes, that's fab. Just that way of like talking. But basically, the thing, what he's saying there is, look, you've got 100 houses. Why should you have 100 kitchens, 100 of all of these different things just because you've got 100 houses? Isn't that so self-evidently unnecessary and ridiculous? And I'm inclined to agree. And I've thought about it for a while, and I've kind of thought about how it would work generally. So I also have some opinions I've mentioned about transport before on this channel, which I guess I will link to probably. And in that, I also mentioned a thing about housing, where I think we should fiddle around with houses. And I think it makes sense to have kind of contained sort of housing units where you've got like these very kind of discrete different communities of housing, little modern villages of sorts. And at the center of those communities, of those estates, of those whatever you want to call them, should be a restaurant. So you wouldn't have any kitchens in any of these houses. And we're not talking hundreds, we're talking not quite 1,000, but more than 100, less than 1,000 houses, no kitchens. They don't need kitchens because there's a kitchen in the center of this area, and you go there. Now, it doesn't have to totally have this like be accompanied by this change to houses, though obviously if you want the benefit of not having kitchens, the change to houses would work, like actually demolishing loads of houses, building up loads of houses, all that jazz. But even if you didn't want to do that, obviously most places still have like places in center. For example, there is a pub close to me that is a very reasonable walk, and therefore it would be perfectly serviceable for this purpose as well, although it would have to be significantly enlarged. But that's basically, that's it. That's the simple thing. And we could get into the nitty gritty of how do you organize the kind of city and like do all of the planning to make it so that this actually comes together. But the basic principle is you have people within a certain radius of a restaurant, and rather than those people having kitchens where they all individually prepare meals, they go to a restaurant. And this is one of those things, like people talk about, there's that quote about like how if nobody had come up with the idea of a public library. Like if a public library hadn't already been an established thing, everyone would think it was like this insane, crazy collectivist socialist idea. Like, oh, we're not just going to have our own individual books. We're going to have like this place where all of the books are and you can just go and take the books as you need it. I feel like it's the exact same thing here. Like if what I'm talking about was just the way things are done from the beginning, like you had these communities of houses and then at the center was just a place you cook and you just cook there. Basically, if what I'm talking about in this video were the case, people who came to like this society where every single person has an individual kitchen just designated for cooking for their relatively small household, people wouldn't be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. They would be like, well, that's an insane thing. Why on earth would you have just like a kitchen where like everybody's eating food, right? At roughly the same times. Why do you need to have like multiple different kitchens all over the place when you just have one kitchen to do the job for everybody? I'm convinced that this would be like, if this is what we had from the start, and if this was something we got used to, then it would be just intuitively obvious that this is the way it makes sense for things to do. So I was actually going to kind of go through and like consider like the positives and then consider some criticisms, but I realized a lot of the time the criticisms are actually positives, or like areas where you could criticize it. Actually, it's a positive. So I kind of just thought I'd just go through it issue by issue. One quick thing. People would have like small kind of breakfast rooms because that makes sense. So like if you've got cereal, you can have some milk and some cereal. You can have like your coffee thing. It doesn't make sense. Like for the very small kind of snacky things, you can have like a mini fridge or that kind of stuff. Like basically, I mean, in some sense, if you're thinking about a hotel, you're probably along the right lines. Like, obviously in a hotel, you usually have a mini fridge with some of the stuff, but actually you don't cook in the hotel. You go down to the restaurant and that's where you eat food. I think that is a good system for society at large to implement. I think there's several benefits. I'm going to go through them and at the time address what I think are some criticisms. So I think first of all, it's worth talking about feminism and women's rights because obviously it's something which I touch on my main channel. And it's also the original reason why this idea was suggested. The original context for this idea of abolishing private kitchen was because it was recognized that unpaid domestic work is a huge aspect of women's oppression. And obviously this isn't so much a priority today. Like obviously, in 1913, where this book that this was written, when it first came out, obviously women were working in the home a lot. It's a very different world. But even today, I mean, if you accept the fact that the domestic sphere can be exploitative, and obviously if you're a radical feminist or anything kind of close to radical feminist, you would accept the fact that the domestic sphere can be incredibly exploitative, then you would have to recognize that unpaid domestic labor as a phenomenon is a huge area where that exploitation can manifest. If there is considerable amount of labor to be done within the house and there's no expectation that somebody's going to be paid for it, you're just creating a scenario where for the oppression of women to be channeled, and having food preparation be a thing that's done in the individual house, in any family where there's going to be a remote tendency towards kind of traditionalism, women are going to be oppressed because women are going to be doing, we know women are going to be doing the vast majority of that labor, which is involved in producing food. And they're not going to be paid for it because the domestic sphere, labor in the domestic sphere, is unpaid. What's the massive difference here? In a restaurant scenario, the people producing the food are paid. That basically what you're doing is you're taking unpaid labor and turning it into paid labor. Obviously I'm not suggesting paid labor. I'm kind of briefly touched on this. I don't think paid labor is totally devoid of exploitation, but it's certainly more devoid of exploitation than unpaid labor. And yeah, the reality is that there are going to be, as long as there is this idea of like jobs that people can do for free and not get paid for it, as long as there is this domestic sphere of labor, women are going to assume the overwhelming burden of that labor compared to men. And therefore, obviously, here's the thing I want to stress, you could say, oh, why don't you just, when you start a family or get in a relationship, why don't you do the cooking? Well, here's the thing, I am going to do the cooking. I love cooking. Although I say that today, I had a bit of a disaster while cooking. where, okay, I'll tell you. Basically, I was steaming some vegetables and I completely, well, I don't know if I didn't put enough water in. I think what happened is the lid wasn't quite on properly, so more of the steam escaped and kind of like evaporation happened faster. And basically, it ended up at the bottom of the pan, boiled dry, burnt, and the vegetables, which had then been steamed, were ended up basically getting smoked in the burnt refuse, or whatever it is, the burnt layer of just crud at the bottom thing just basically smoked the vegetables with this horrible, disgusting taste. It was the worst thing ever. But despite that, I still do consider myself to be a pretty alright cook, and I would say cooking is definitely my sphere. But here's the thing, I'm saying that and I'm me. But the reality is that there's lots of people who aren't me, lots of men who aren't me, and there's plenty of men who will be, to varying degrees, more traditional in the way that they live their lives. And unless you're planning on just changing all of those men, the best thing you can do is just eradicate the very, you're not going to stop those men from having the expectation that women will do all of this work around the house. The best thing you can do is reduce the amount of work that there is to be done around the house. And one of the ways you can do that is by having this concept of, just making sure I'm recording things, having this concept of restaurants rather than people, no kitchens, abolish the private kitchen, boom, that's it. Now, the other benefit to this is economic on a kind of more macro scale, because obviously I'm talking about the fact we're abolishing unpaid domestic labor and replacing it with paid labor. And what are you doing there? You're creating jobs. Think about it. How many people say, like, oh, we need more jobs. Jobs. Well, think about all the jobs you've just created. You've taken this huge amount of work and you've made it something which now people can do for a wage. Like, basically, here's the thing. I know some people are going to say, well, hold on a minute, Michael. I thought you were some kind of a socialist type. What are you doing saying that we need to create jobs and that's a good thing? That's some neoliberal capitalist talk I'm hearing. But here's the thing, okay, I should stress this. I'm not one of those people who believes we shouldn't have jobs. But what I am one of those people who believes that, like, we should have far less time should be spent on, like the working week than currently is. I think the 40-hour work week is ridiculous. But here's the thing. Creating jobs isn't a problem. What is a problem is creating work. Increasing the amount of work that needs doing in order to create jobs. And obviously, you think about it, for example, there are many instances of things which could be done quite easily by being automated. And, there are many, I have lots of ideas for jobs that shouldn't exist. I'm talking right now about creating a job, or, not obviously, I know the idea of like working in a restaurant is already a thing, but creating, like, rapidly increasing the number of people who would be working in that job. But I also have lots of beliefs about different jobs that shouldn't exist, because I think that the work that those jobs are engaged in, the work that people who do those jobs are engaged in, is unnecessary. I would, for example, say that advertising just shouldn't be a thing. And certainly that we shouldn't have TV commercials and stuff like that. That's a massive sector of work that's just gone, because, obviously I'm kind of an anti-consumerist. You could probably imagine that. So I just don't think it should be a thing. There's many examples like that of where I just think there are jobs which just shouldn't exist. But the point is that they shouldn't exist because the work there is unnecessary work. It's socially unnecessary labor. But producing food, making food for people to eat, that's very socially necessary labor. And therefore, that work is going to be there no matter what. You can't reduce the amount of work, but what you can do is take that work and make it so it's a job. It's something people can do to make money. It can be used to reduce poverty. It just works, basically. The reality is that right now people are, getting stressed out about employment, how many people are employed, all that, people are on universal credit and all of that, job seekers allowance. But here's a job which could just exist, and it would be a, very easy entry level job for lots of people to do. It creates jobs. And obviously, in a standard political discussion, creating jobs wouldn't be seen as a controversial thing. But obviously, because I know a lot of people might be kind of varying degrees of left wing, they might say, well, "What's so great about creating jobs?" But again, the point is, it's creating jobs by taking socially necessary work and making it be paid for, and I think that's a very good thing. Now, the other point to be made is that this is saving time. So it's not only taking work that is necessary and making it so people are being paid for it. It's also drastically and dramatically at the same time, reducing the total amount of work that needs to be done. And this is just so bloody obvious. I mean, isn't it? Because think about the amount of work people spend cooking. Well, okay, first of all, let's point out why it would save work. Big pot of spaghetti bolognese. This would be a big pot of spaghetti bolognese. Like, the reality is that this is a situation where you could have things prepared in way more of an assembly line manner, which is just a way more efficient, time-efficient way of doing things. It also means, for example, there's obviously the kind of equation you have to do with some of your gadgets in the kitchen, where you think to yourself, oh, is it worth using the food processor? Is it worth getting this particular gadget? And obviously the point is that lots of these things only save meaningful amounts of time if you're cooking for a huge number of people. Well, guess what? If you're cooking for a huge number of people, that means that you should do the things which save meaningful amounts of time, aka you can be like a billion times more efficient about it. You can just have a guy, like, the reality is that chopping up an onion for food, it takes a while, it's kind of annoying. But if you have got first of all, you could consider actually just doing something with a food processor maybe. But even if you just have an assembly line production where you've got one person cuts the onion in half, the other person peels the onion, then the other person puts the slices this way, the other person puts slices that way, and then you just mince the onion in not very long at all, put it in the pot, got someone else stirring it. This is way more efficient than just having one person running around their own personal kitchen, getting the onion. Oh, where's the knife? Oh, the knife. Oh, I need to wash up the knife. The reality is that individual people just can't be expected to manage a kitchen as well as people for whom it would be, they've got all these people. It's like a professional environment. And obviously, yeah, there's the, of course, scale aspect of it. Just the fact that some things literally are exactly equivalent. So obviously with the onion thing, it's kind of a case of, it's going to take, it's not going to take 10 times longer to prepare 100 onions than it would to prepare 10 onions, if you get what I'm saying. The reality is that as you're doing more of it, it just, you become more efficient, and it kind of less time per onion in total. But there's some things where it's literally no increased time at all. For example, stirring a big pot. If you're making a small pot of bolognese for one household, that's just as much stirring as if you're making a massive pot of bolognese for a huge number of people. Pretty obvious how this saves time. And obviously the thing is, you have to think about how much time, we get bent out of shape. Obviously, again, if you're kind of a left-wing person, maybe you're on the kind of anti-work vibe, you'll probably think to yourself, think about all the time we spend at work, or the 9 to 5. But here's the thing. How much less annoying would the 9 to 5 be if you didn't have to prepare dinner when you got home? Preparing dinner when you get home is one of the really annoying things. People obsess over weeknight meals. Because why? Because you want weeknight meals because you've just come back from work. You've got to prepare a meal. I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on reducing the working day, because the working day is unnecessarily long, considering, how much unnecessary labor there is in the current economy. But the reality is that I don't think the working day would be anything as just miserable if you could just come home and just have nothing to worry about. It's just all done. And yeah, the issue is people spend, I spend a good amount of time cooking. I would say seems like preparing food really does take an hour out of a day. And that's, and the waking day is 16 hours. If you want to say, okay, the time you're at work too, the reality is that any amount of food, and obviously there's Jamie Oliver's 15-minute meals, and that's kind of the thing. Yeah, if you can get a meal done in 15 minutes, that's good. But even then, 15 minutes, that's not no amount of time. And the reality is it's not going to take you 15 minutes. You get these things 15-minute meal. It takes you twice that time. So now it's half an hour. And those are the quick meals. very easily a meal could take longer than that. Yeah, the reality is it's all of this work. No one wants to do it. Guess what? You don't, like, lots of people wouldn't have to do any work at all. And obviously the people who work at the restaurant, they would be doing this work then, but they would be working in shifts. When they're not on the shifts, they don't have to do this. You know, they can just go to the restaurant themselves. People just, yeah, this like massive obligation of like making food on the daily. And I mean, this is also before you get into kind of like depression. Like so many people with depression have a thing about like preparing food. And even I, you know, like I definitely have had depression at some points in my life. I'm not sure to what extent I've really had kind of depression. But I've kind of had like anxiety that's made me feel very depressed. So whatever. And I've had those moments where it's just like, you just don't want to do anything. And like, how nice would it be that, yeah, you don't have to do anything. Like actually, it's not expected that you prepare a full, nutritious, balanced meal for yourself every day. That's something which is part of, you know, it's a service provided for you. The same way there's lots of other things it's just not expected that you do because, you know, there's, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I'm trying to think of like a good example of something which is like consistently done for you by people. I mean, you could just talk about the benefits of living in society, like the fact we have roads, for example. There's lots of things. We live in society. We have these benefits. We don't have to do everything ourselves. Anyway, so that's that. But also, cost. So this is something people might say as a negative at first. They might be like, well, hold on a minute, this sounds very expensive. You're saying every single person should eat out at a restaurant, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? That sounds like the cost is really going to add up. But here's the thing, Kane. If you factor in, if you value your time, then actually, you know, like, it's worth it. Like, even if it was a greater cost, you're saving time. And time is an incredibly valuable resource. We have a very limited amount of time on this earth. So saving that time is immeasurably valuable. But the other thing is that when you consider the economy of scale involved, obviously that applies with time, it also applies with money. So, you know, generally speaking, when you have to buy like a small number of, you know, I don't have to explain to you the economy of scale. Yeah, when you spend lots of money on big amount of things, it tends to save money overall. So obviously, in terms of the raw ingredients, this will be less expensive than the average grocery trip because you have the economy of scale. And also, I think restaurants get discounted. And then again, like the labor, well, you're going to have to pay for labor. There's wages that have to be paid for. But it's also worth noting, I don't think that meals would be as expensive as they are at restaurants presently. Because again, there's also the fact the restaurant would be bringing in way more customers by everybody being there. You know, one of the reasons why restaurants struggle is because they can't really predict how many people are going to be there. You know, there's all sorts of issues. But if there's like over 100 and up to 1,000 people are eating in the same place 3 times a day, the reality is that I don't think that you would actually have to be spending that much on the food in order to cover the cost of the food and cover the cost of labor and cover the cost of all these other things. I don't think it would be that expensive. And all of this is before getting into the very significant fact that people would avoid the cost of kitchens. So for rent, this is significant because if you're renting, then 100%, the loss or the reduction from your rent from not having a kitchen in your house would more than cover the cost of buying the food. You know, there's people who don't bother buying cars because they just take taxis everywhere. Because actually, a car is so expensive that actually, depending on how much you want to travel, and also parking is expensive, it might just be cheaper to get taxis everywhere. Similarly, yeah, the reality is that owning, like, and obviously, you know, I was talking about rent, but if you even talk about buying your house outright, that house is going to be way more expensive. Like, think about how much a kitchen costs. £10,000? I'm pretty sure, you know, like, to get a kitchen fully done up, all the appliances, all of that, the space, the actual extra room you need in your house, I'm sure that costs at least £10,000. So how many times could you go to a restaurant for £10,000? I suspect the answer is, I mean, I can't really work it out, but I mean, let's say the average dish is £10. That means you can go to a restaurant 1,000 times, and you haven't actually lost any money at all because you've saved all the money from not having a kitchen. So I don't think, I think actually on reality, it's there isn't this huge cost associated with it. It actually saves money for the consumer. Here's another benefit: community. So the thing is, like, one of the things that happens nowadays with cooking is effort. So people eat food in front of the TV or in front of stuff, and it's like that kind of makes sense because the reality is, like, you're in the kitchen, like, you can't really watch something while you're in the kitchen. It's not easy to do because you're like focusing on not chopping your fingers off and all of that stuff. So, and personally for me, like, we don't, in our kitchen, there's not really like the ability to kind of watch stuff. So I'm just sat there in the kitchen, like when I'm cooking something, I'm kind of just bored. But then, so obviously I've eaten a meal. I now don't want to have to like just sit down, continuing to do nothing while I eat the meal. I want to go watch something, go up to my room, watch a YouTube video, probably of somebody actually cooking while I eat my food. And the thing is, I do think the idea of like sitting down to eat a meal together is a good thing. It's a good thing socially to actually have this community that you can build up by people eating together, breaking bread together, all that kind of stuff. But when you've had all this time you spent cooking to then have the time sat down at the meal table, all the kind of faff that comes with that, it's annoying. But here's the thing. It's not annoying if you don't actually have to do the cooking. So the reality is people can come down to the restaurant and they can be hanging out, talking, then the food comes, they eat, talk some more. Like, it's much better for the community, even kind of like within the family, because like it's going to encourage people actually eating together more. But also you're going to see actual people at the, you're going to see people like, hey, like, think about how many times you just don't see your neighbors. Like, you'd see your neighbors with this happening. You'd like say, hey, hi. Yeah. I mean, think about all the friends you make on like, so I've never been on a cruise. The rest of my family have. they left me behind. No, there were reasons why I couldn't go, but basically, I've never been on a cruise personally. But when the rest of my family has been on more than one cruise, and one of the things that I heard about is that they've like made so many friends on the cruise, and it always starts like they'll be like, they'll be talking about this particular person they met or whatever, and they'll be like, and it always starts, oh yeah, we're eating dinner, and then we met them. Like, that's the thing. And it's happened, I mean, it has happened at restaurants that I have like ended up talking to somebody at a restaurant, and you feel like, again, I've never like made a friend like properly, but you like actually have the interaction. It's good, it's positive. So yeah, that's the thing. Like, you make friends, and that's cool. That's a good thing in our society. Like, I guess you can, spoiler alert, I'm making a video about abolishing the private kitchen. I'm not an individualist. I think community is good. I think collectivism is good. I think coming together is good. And it's what we need in our society. And it's what's really become increasingly missing with this horrendous, destructive wave of neoliberalism that's descended over everything. Anyway, so that's good. And also you can have like community themed eating. Okay. I need to make a video about veganism at some point, but I'll say this. I think that we should have fewer, like, not many of the meals should have meat in them. But I personally, and again, I'm not talking about veganism right now, but I do think I like the idea that, like, say on Sunday you do so in the UK we have like a roast dinner on Sunday. It's like a thing. And like, actually the reason for it apparently is like, used to be people weren't so rich. You could maybe only eat meat once a week. So you'd have like your meat on Sunday and it'd be like, yeah, you've got the meat on Sunday, and you just sit around. It's like you make a big deal out of it. And that's something which I like, but also obviously Christmas. And I mean, like, also seasonal vegetables. Like, there's so many ways in which, like, people who are just like getting by just cooking food and all that kind of stuff, they're not really gonna bother with all this kind of like having like seasonal stuff, having like themed stuff, things like that. But that's the kind of nonsense that a restaurant could do. Yeah, you'd love to have like a proper like, oh, it's like, oh my goodness me. I haven't been to a carvery in so long, and I want to be in a carvery. So carveries, for I think they don't exist outside of the UK. A carvery is basically an all you can eat, but it's for like roast dinner, which sounds British people. We just like roast dinners are so good. I love roast dinners. Like I mean I know that we're like famous for roast potatoes. You know, the British and the Irish, who are British. Let's be real. But yeah, like so it's you go there and you have like a plate and you go up and you get your meat, and then you can just get like all the different sizes. It's like all the different sizes. And again, like here's the thing though, the kind of nonsense that. Well, okay, actually, I'm gonna jump ahead because yeah, basically you get what I'm saying about the community thing. Like, you can have these kind of themes. You can have like the Christmas dinner. You can have pumpkin for Halloween. Whatever else, lamb, Easter, all that kind of stuff. And obviously, well, here's the thing. The next issue people might say is variability. So obviously, like the preference, like people who are vegan and like, I need to be vegan all the time. Obviously, there should be vegan options all the time. Also, for like all the other things, like, like you need to be mindful of people's actual very real dietary restrictions. But the point I was going to make about, so the point I'm touching on is kind of variability. Like, you should have a variety. And of course, there would be a variety, because the reality is we're talking about you're making food for over 100 people. It's not just going to be one thing of bolognese, is it? Because that's not going to feed 100 people unless it's a pretty bloody big thing of bolognese. So it's going to be bolognese, but then you're going to have other stuff going on. It's going to be different options. Again, in terms of like the serving, I've always thought like, should it be? I was thinking like buffet style. I think for some instances buffet style works. For example, like the roast dinner thing, which I'll just about to, don't worry, I'm going to get to that in a second. But I also think the idea of like an app, even though like the idea of like everything having an app for it seems like just such a lame thing, I actually think this is one of the rare cases where it would just work and wouldn't be totally obnoxious. Like you could just load up your app and then the restaurant knows when you're coming, what it is you want, and boom, like I think that would be like a good system to kind of make it work even more efficiently. So about, okay, we got this guy coming, okay, we need this many things up at this time, blah, blah, blah. But okay, let me talk about carvery. So what's great is that you have all of these sides you can have. And the thing is, what's great about it is you're not going to be bothered to do all of this stuff yourself, realistically. Like maybe for Christmas, you'll pull the boat out. But to be honest, even then it's kind of annoying because, for example, you've got all these different elements that all need cooking. You've only got one oven. It's difficult to make it all work. At a restaurant, no. This restaurant would have like dozens of ovens. So they can literally just have a whole oven filled with Brussels sprouts. A whole oven filled with braised red cabbage. Just a whole, like everything, a whole oven filled with pigs in blankets. A whole oven filled with Yorkshire pudding. Literally, yeah, all these things which you've got to like with your one oven, you've got to think like, well, I've got to do this and then this comes out, but then that would be getting cold and this needs to go in and then this would take a certain amount of time, blah, blah. You're thinking about all this stuff, thinking, okay, what can go on the hob or stove if you're American? What can go on the hob? What can go in the oven? What can go where? What can be cooked in advance? All that kind of stuff. You're thinking about all this. Restaurant doesn't need to think all of this. Carvery doesn't need to think all of this. And that's the thing. The carvery, they can just have all this stuff out and you can just be like, yeah, I'll have that and that and that and that and that. What are you getting there? More variety. I mean, think about the standard roast dinner, really, that the average person can make. It's going to have like, we actually have an expression, meat and two veg, which is both a term sometimes used to refer to a man's genitalia, but also as like an actual meal in the UK. Like it's meat, two veg. And the implication that doesn't sound that exciting, does it? But of course, it's because if you're just like one person in a kitchen and it's just your own kitchen, you're not going to do all of these fancy things with your veg. You're just going to have like whatever, just, you're going to make one kind of vegetable side and that's it. So actually you have less variety than if you're at a place where, you go to a restaurant, they have all these different things they can get you. They can have asparagus and, whatever else, spinach, and you don't need me to just sit here naming vegetables. I will, just while I'm on this, talk about my ordering at a restaurant principle. And I think it's worth stressing this. Actually, wait, I'll finish up on the variability thing so that I can make this all nice in the in the timeline. So here's the thing. I do think in some cases having absolute variety is bad. Like I think there's some instances where people should just be kind of forced. Like if you like, I don't think people should have the option of not doing Christmas. If you are alive on December 25th of any year, you're having Christmas stuff. You don't have to have the meat. You don't have to have the turkey. You can have some kind of nut roast or whatever it is that people have. But you can't be like, oh, I don't do Christmas. You can't be a Seventh-day Adventist like, oh, it's a pagan holiday. I don't really celebrate it. No, you're celebrating it. You're doing it. This is non-negotiable. I've kind of already touched on this a bit before when I was speaking about prisons. Like this idea of people just having absolute freedom. No. Funny thing is for me, it's usually like these kind of unnecessary things. I very strongly feel if I could force everybody to wear Christmas jumpers throughout the entirety of December, I would do it. And I certainly would be like, no, I don't care that you don't have variability in terms of what you can have for Christmas on December 25th. I don't want you to have variability. You have a Christmas lunch like everybody else. The final point of variability, most people's repertoire is quite limited anyway. Like most people's like repertoire of recipes. It's kind of like, oh, what should we have? Fish with veg, chicken with veg, spaghetti, fajitas, chili con carne, curry, it's stir fry. I mean, I'm not, obviously, if I were to actually name every single possible meal you could think of, it would be quite a few. But the point is, it's not going to be an insane number. If people have those meals, they just tend to repeat. I mean, that was like the whole appeal of like HelloFresh. It's like, oh, you get to try new things you wouldn't try before, which, is genuinely true. And obviously it would work the exact same way at a restaurant. Oh, they could do these things which like people might not try before, and you'd be like, oh yeah, I try it. So again, that's another positive for the variability. So as an aside, I want to communicate my personal beliefs about ordering food at restaurants. Now this is, I want to stress, this applies to the current day where eating at a restaurant is something special. In the world as it should be, where eating at a restaurant is something you do every single day, this wouldn't apply. But right now, when eating at a restaurant is very special, I guess I should say, to start off, never order steak at a restaurant. And there's like obvious reasons for this, but the simplest reason is because preparing a steak is bloody easy. You put it in a pan and you cook it. It's not a hard thing to make. Like when you see people cooking steaks, you notice it's not difficult. And here's the thing, like a steak at a restaurant costs like 14 quid, like just a standard sirloin. Do you have any idea how nice of a steak you could buy for 14 quid if you just cooked it at home? Like, it's not a difficult thing to do. So basically, the point I'm making here is whatever you're eating at a restaurant or ordering at a restaurant should be something that will be at least a little bit difficult for you to do yourself. For example, I'm a big fan of ordering lasagna at a restaurant because lasagna is a bloody difficult amount of work to put together myself. Although I do kind of think at a pub, I'm like, are they just like taking this from a packet and just reheating it? That doesn't seem that, I could, again, restaurants in general. I mean, this is kind of like a bit of an ironic term. I was about to say restaurants in general are pretty rubbish, but the point is that restaurants in general are rubbish because right now there's supposed to be this like, when you have the option of cooking at home in our current society, eating at a restaurant is an obvious waste of money. But the point is that we as a society should make it so that you don't have the option of cooking at home, so restaurants become more affordable and not a waste of money, and kitchens by contrast are seen as a waste of effort. Because yeah, I mean, obviously that's the thing. I personally am like, as somebody who is somewhat frugal, I'm like, well, I'm going to go like the meal prep route, if anything, and actually go like hardcore the other way. Like I want to have like 2 freezers just so I can kind of like make sure I've got all this stuff and like stock everything and all that. Like the funny thing is my personal idea of how I want to live in this current society is radically contrary to how I think the society should be, because I recognize we live in an individualist society where the best way to get by is by individual kind of management of what you're doing in your life. And that's contrary to how I think society should be, but it's like, well, it's how society is, so it's just what I'm going to do. So that's kind of like, yeah, that's what I think about like eating at a restaurant versus kitchen. I don't want to eat at a restaurant in this society because we live in a society where the money that you spend at a restaurant, that's you making that choice as an individual, and it's costing you money as an individual when you could make the alternative choice as an individual to go and cook food yourself. That's kind of the issue with individualism, though. I think it creates those kind of situations where even though rationally it's far more efficient to have one person cooking in a restaurant environment for everybody, individually it's like, well, I should do, individualism is irrational, is I guess the point I'm making. But here's the thing, if you're going to order something at a restaurant, the best thing to order is a sandwich, because, especially a fried chicken sandwich, because, or, again, if you're a vegan or whatever, fried aubergine. But yeah, basically, which to be honest, I mean, that's not actually half bad, a fried aubergine sandwich. It's pretty good. Sometimes I go for the, I go for plenty of kind of vegan options, but sometimes at a restaurant I'll go for like the vegan option because I think they'll often like put more effort to make it taste good, and boy does it taste good. Anyway, but that's the thing, like a sandwich is good because like, you as an individual probably can't like do the efficiency of like buying one fancy loaf of bread and getting all of like the different things, the spread, you get the spread and then it's like you're just going to leave it or whatever. All the different things that are going to go with it, like the relish and the different pieces of salad and all that kind of stuff. You probably, like, it's going to be annoying for you to get all of that stuff together, but the restaurant's just going to have all of that stuff anyway. So like they can just do it super easy and they like prepare the sandwich for you and then boom. Yeah, I love ordering sandwiches at restaurants. I very rarely, like, so for example, I hardly ever order pasta because I'm like, I remember I went to a restaurant and they had like, you could have like this sandwich and it was like, oh, it was good. It had like, it was a kind of fried aubergine sandwich of like pesto and like nuts and like parmesan, so it wasn't vegan, but whatever. Anyway, but yeah, had all of this stuff in it. I was like, yes. And then they had carbonara. And I was like, carbonara, that thing you can literally just throw together like so easily, just chop up some bacon. I just offend so many Italians. Chop up some bacon, chop up some garlic, put in some olive oil, fry, crack an egg with some cheese, boom, in you go, throw in the pasta. You got it. Wasn't that hard. Also mushrooms, they're lovely. But yeah, basically, it's not hard. And that's it. When you're at a restaurant, eat things that will actually be hard to make. But that's kind of the funny thing. Like, obviously, it's another example of why restaurants are so good, because obviously, like I say, you're not going to have all that sandwich stuff, but you can just like, like a salad bar. That's the thing, like a salad bar, you can't have a salad bar at your house. Salad bars at restaurants, that's like a common thing. Oh, goodness me. I'm just like, I'm salivating thinking about this society, this utopia I'm envisioning where you can just, every lunch, you can just have a salad bar. And like, and again, it's efficient because obviously, it might cost slightly more than buying all of the individual ingredients yourself, but on balance, you're probably going to save money because you don't have to buy a kitchen. You don't have to buy, you don't have to work on keeping all this stuff fresh and whatever else. And that's a good segue because let's talk about waste. The reality is that, goodness me, the amount of salad that I see wasted in my life. So here's the thing. You might say, well, aren't restaurants kind of wasteful? And one of the big reasons you could say restaurants are wasteful is because of like leftovers, like somebody takes, more than they can manage at a restaurant. You can't like, here's the thing, if in my current house I take more than I can manage, I can put it to one side and be like, I'll have it as leftovers later. Restaurant, like doing leftovers is a bit of a risk. Like people are like, well, I'm going to a restaurant. Like the reality is people have a certain standard they expect. They don't expect it to have leftovers. So isn't that going to be more wasteful than like, people can have leftovers, reuse them. Now I should stress, you could have leftovers in this current society too, because you could have a system where, I mentioned people have their own breakfast rooms, people could have their own microwaves there, and therefore you could get your leftovers, microwave it, have that, as a lunch without having to go to a restaurant. That's a possibility. But I just want to point something out, which is, if you're going to complain about waste, private kitchens are already very wasteful. And yeah, certainly I've seen a lot of waste in private kitchens myself. And also, what else is wasteful? Grocery shops. Supermarkets are way wasteful. That's like a whole thing. Like they throw out food all the time. We know about this. So like they're wasteful too, and like they've recently introduced like more policies to make them less wasteful. Like, you know, they really like, you know, they have the reduce thing for stuff that's just about to go off and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, they're very wasteful. I don't think anything's going to stop them being wasteful. And the thing is, I feel like restaurants would be better able to deal with waste. And the reason for this is that, like, I think lots of people in our current society, like in a private kitchen, don't really know what to do with waste. Like, we have kind of like a food waste thing in our house where, like, you know, obviously people have compost and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people just put their food waste in the general waste, in the bin. And obviously that is very wasteful. That's incredibly wasteful. Not to mention, I mean, it leads to all sorts of issues like birds get into it and peck it, and then you end up with like rubbish being spread everywhere. It's a terrible system. And conversely, restaurants could so much better deal with this because they'd like know what to do with it. And there's the fact that I think restaurants could deal with farms directly. So basically, my thought would be that the restaurant, wastes a heck of a lot of food, but they get all of that food that's waste, all the food, like they get it all off of the plates and all of that. And I think, you know, me personally, pigs, right? Like pigs, as far as I know, were the original recycling, because it's like they eat anything and then you can eat pigs. So, you know, I would say that's like a thing. You could just be like, okay, yeah, they just go to the pigs, but also of course compost as well. And, you know, maybe you could kind of split it a bit. But the reality is, like, you have this organic matter food, just send it back to the farms, and then it can be used to help make more food, so people can eat more food. Great system. And that's the thing. Like, this is a way less wasteful system what we have now, where people just like put all of their stuff in like this. You know, at best they compost it themselves or put it in food waste. But chances are lots of it goes into general waste, just goes straight to the landfill. Food for the seagulls, fantastic. But yeah, the reality is that most of it doesn't get, you know how to deal with it. Whereas you have these restaurants, they can say, okay, yeah, we can take stock of how much waste we have. And obviously, you know, they can try to reduce waste in different ways. But the reality is that whatever waste they do have, they say, okay, let's not waste it though. Let's send it back to the farms. And obviously, yeah, I mean, pigs is a good system. You know, like that's the thing. They eat everything. And I think they'd be, you know, very happy with leftovers from a restaurant. But, you know, yeah, if not pigs, then, you know, like use it just as like organic fertilizer, whatever else. Now, the other thing about them dealing directly with farms is plastic waste. So I think personally that every single restaurant should have a relationship with a farm. Okay, so I've mentioned kind of my idea of like housing. I also think outside of the housing areas, there should be big farming areas. And basically like that should just be, the farming area should provide enough food for the community within. And the farming area should give that food directly to the restaurant. And here's the thing, no plastic. Because they could just put all the food in like, you know, those big wooden crates, drive them to the restaurant, give them to the restaurant says, and you know, while they're down there, the restaurant can say, oh, here's all of our leftover stuff from yesterday, take this up to the farm, says, no plastic involved. And ain't that fantastic? You know, and obviously I'm not saying you can't ever use plastic. Obviously, I think with freezing fish and stuff, could be that plastic's a bit more necessary to kind of like, you know, keep it from getting like freezer burn or whatever. But the reality is that I think you need like packaging, you just wouldn't need it. Like, you know, yeah, okay, we've got the fresh food coming straight in, just goes straight to the restaurant. You don't have to have this kind of whole thing of it like going to a guy who goes to a guy and then it goes into storage and it goes to the groceries and then you pick it up and then you put it in your thing. Like all of that unnecessary stuff is just from the farm to the restaurant. Next thing you know, it's food. And also on that note, endocrine disruptors. So you notice metal water bottle. Why? Because, and this is a real thing, plastic releases chemicals. And when you think about it, like, isn't this kind of obvious? Like, plastic is basically made from like refining crude oil and then using like the kind of carbon strains or whatever to make like moldable plastic. And then you put that against the food you eat. If you're a real maverick, you bloody microwave it with the food you eat. And then you put it in your body and think it's not causing issues. No, it is. And endocrine disruptors basically mess with your hormones. They cause all sorts of different side effects. This isn't some like crazy conspiracy. This isn't like the soy boy thing. This is actually like a real thing. And Adam Ragusa has a video on it, who's obviously, and he's like got a lot of integrity. Except for he recently did a video. What was it? He did a video which was like very obviously sponsored. Oh, it was on Trade Coffee, and it was like the whole video was like talking about how great coffee is. And I was like, I don't know, I didn't like that. But the thing is, most of the time he's like, I take him very seriously. And he had a whole video on endocrine disruptors. They're a real thing. They're actually very bad for you. And it's generally agreed minimizing the contact between your food and plastic is a very good thing to do. And basically, it would be great if you could have it so like a lot of the food you're eating never touches plastic at all. And that would be very easy to do with this system. So not only do you have less waste, you also have less kind of, like environmental pollution making its way into your food. So that's a big positive. Now, I want to consider one final negative, which is people might say, what about class? Because, okay, and I want to mention something else, which I was going to mention at the beginning, but then I thought people might have class in their mind this whole time. I not only think that, so I think people should live in, basically, so the easiest way to explain it is I think people should live effectively in kind of big blocks of flats. And there should be a restaurant where they go to and they eat. But I also think, a hotel is a better kind of analogy, which I've already kind of touched on. People, it's like you live in a hotel. And do you know what else you have in a hotel? A cleaner who goes from room to room. And I think that's what you should have. I don't think that people should, own vacuums. I don't think people should own mops or brushes or anything like that. I think there should be people who are professional cleaners who have good quality vacuums, the best quality stuff for cleaning, and they go around the entire area and they clean everything up. And again, it's kind of for similar reasons. I think it's more efficient. And also I think that it alleviates kind of the issue of domestic labor. And also on that note, of course, there's washing dishes. Dishwashing is very annoying. It's not an issue here. That's just another positive. But you may be thinking, hold on a minute. You're talking about this underclass of people who just cook everybody's food, clean up everything for everybody. Isn't this an issue? It's something which people might think. And it's pretty obvious the answer is no. We need to fundamentally change the way that we view people such that anybody who's doing socially necessary labor is that should not be considered lower class. This idea of class, it's obviously nonsense. So admittedly, this isn't I'm ending on this. It's not some massive kind of a fantastic debunking. It's just pointing out, it just shouldn't be like that. And yeah, I do think we should have a system where there are cleaners who go house to house, flat to flat, apartment to apartment, whatever else you want to call it. And they clean your house. But at no point while you're sat there doing whatever job you're doing, do you think to yourself, these people are lower than me in some way. And, obviously I think, making it so there is no kind of class stigma around different kinds of work is a real challenge. And obviously one of the things that needs to happen is that the wages paid, spoiler alert, I think the cleaners should be earning probably as much as you doing whatever job you're doing. So that's kind of, I think that there shouldn't be low paying jobs. So that's obviously one massive solution. But yeah, I guess that's kind of it. I don't think that, and obviously I know there's an idea of restaurant workers can be underpaid in some contexts, and that's a bad thing too. But no, people shouldn't be underpaid. I don't know that I've necessarily covered kind of all of the exact technical issues. I hope I've made the case reasonably well, because I think the case is pretty strong that like there's no reason to have all this like private kitchen stuff, everybody individually cooking their own meals, when the restaurant system works so much better. Anyway, and so that's why I think one of, I guess, maybe in some sense my more novel, when I imagine like my utopian future, I hear people talk about utopian futures all the time. One thing that's very kind of unique about my envisioning of a utopian future is you would go there, you'd go to somebody's house, no kitchen, they would get to dinner time, and they'd say, all right, I'm ordering on the app. What do you want from the restaurant? And you'd be like, oh, is it a special occasion? No, it's just what we do. Just don't have to cook a whole meal. What? In your crazy world, people have it's like 4 people have a kitchen between them in like one household, and like one person has to cook, like do like an hour's work to cook food for like 4 people. Oh, that sounds like a horrible dystopia. That's what people would be saying. The people of my utopia spit on this society with its private kitchens.